I had made my peace with feeling nothing. A king learns that trick early, or he does not last. My father taught it to me across the years he was dying, that a border lord's heart is a thing he holds in reserve, spent only where it buys something, never given for the pleasure of the giving. So on the night they brought me a wife I had not chosen, I stood at the head of my hall with my hands loose at my sides and my face arranged, and I waited to feel the small, cold weight of another duty settling on. Rain came sideways off the sable and hissed on the torches at the door. The ford was up. They had crossed her over the 12 stones in the dark and the wet, which told me plainly enough what my regent thought of her, that a bride worth honoring is not walked through a flood at midnight like a strayed ewe brought late to fold. "She comes," Dane said at my shoulder. My master of hounds, gray as his own beasts, the only man in that hall who had loved me since I was a boy small enough to ride his back. "Steady, lad." "I am steady," I said, which was true and meant nothing. The doors opened on the storm. 2 of Halloran's men came first, cloaks black with water, and between them a figure so wrapped against the cold that for a moment I saw only the rain running off her and pooling on my father's stones. Then she put back her hood. I have tried in the years since to say honestly what happened to me in that moment, and I have never found the words that do not sound like a younger man's foolishness. I will only tell it as it was. All my life I had carried a noise inside me, the war drums of a border that had never known a whole year of peace, the endless clamor of a council that wanted 100 things at once, the restless run of my own blood that would not let me sit still even in sleep. I had carried it so long I no longer heard it as noise. It was simply the sound of being Ronan of Rivenford. When she raised her face and looked down the length of my hall and found me without flinching, all of it stopped, not softened. Stopped the way a flooded river goes silent the instant it finally freezes, that vast held breath, that white astonished quiet. My wolf Bracken, who lay always at the dais and growled at strangers on principle, lifted his gray head and did not growl. He only watched her the way a hound watches the one who is coming home. I did not know her name yet. I knew nothing about her, and some part of me that I did not consult had already gone still and certain, the way you are certain of your own name. She walked to me over the wet stone. She did not hurry and she did not cringe, though every soul in that hall was measuring her. The shabby traveling cloak, the plain dark braid, the boots worn thin at the toe, the dowry that was, everyone knew exactly nothing. She stopped at the foot of the dais and inclined her head, and when she spoke her voice was low and even, a voice used to being obeyed by tired people in hard winters. "My lord king," she said, "I am Eloin of Ferromark. I am told we are to be wed in the morning." "You are told correctly," I said. "Then I would ask one thing before it, if a bride is allowed to ask." Behind me I heard Halloran shift. My regent did not like brides who asked. He liked this one to stand mute and shivering and small, so that the whole court might see what a poor bargain their king had been handed and murmur it, and let the murmur grow into a question, and the question into a knife. I understood the shape of the thing even then, in its rough outline. I did not yet understand how deep he had cut. "Ask," I said. "My people," she said. "Ferromark is 40 households on the wrong side of a river that floods. If this marriage is meant to buy them peace, I would have your word the peace is real, that when the feasting is done and I am no longer novel, the grain still crosses the ford to them. I have not come for a crown, my lord. I have come for that." For a long moment I said nothing, because I did not trust what I would say. I had expected a frightened girl. I had been handed, instead, a woman who had walked through a midnight flood to a stranger's hall, and before she asked for so much as a fire to dry herself, had asked for bread for people who were not there to hear her do it. "You have my word," I said. "And you have more than that, my lady, though you have not asked for it, so I will give it plainly and before witnesses, that no one in this hall may ever pretend I did not." The court had gone quiet. Halloran had gone very quiet indeed. "This marriage was arranged for you and for me both by others for reasons of their own. I will not hold you to a bond you did not choose. Warm yourself tonight. Sleep and eat, and in the morning, if you wish it, I will send you home to Pharaohmark with grain enough for 2 winters and an honor guard to see you safe. And there will be no marriage and no shame in it, and the peace will stand regardless because I say it stands. You owe me nothing. Do you understand me?" Something moved across her face, surprise, and under it something older and more tired, as though kindness were a country she had heard of but not lately visited. "I understand you, my lord," she said. "May I have the night to answer?" "You may have as long as you like," I said. "It is your answer to give." She dipped her head again and let Dane lead her toward the fire and the dry rooms, and I stood on my dais with my hall full of watching faces and the strangest sensation I had known in my life. A quiet where the noise had been, a stillness that felt less like loss than like a held note finally landing on its true chord. Halloran came to my side, smiling the smile he wore when he was displeased. "Generous," he said, "perhaps too generous. The court will wonder that a king offers to send his own bride home before the marriage bed is even made. It looks," he chose the word like a man choosing a stone to throw, "soft." "It looks," I said, "like a king who does not need to force a woman to want him. Was there something else, Regent?" There was not. He bowed and withdrew, and I watched him go, this man who had ruled Rivenford in my name through the long years of my boyhood and had never quite forgiven me for growing up. I had known for some time that Halloran loved the shape of power more than he loved me, or the border, or anything that could bleed. I had not yet understood what he had built. I only knew, standing there in the new and unfamiliar quiet of myself, that he had brought me this woman to wound me, and that some accident of the fates had turned the blade in his hand. She came to me the next morning, before the household was fully awake, and found me on the wall above the ford where I go when I cannot sleep, watching the river run brown and swollen between its 12 black stones. "My lord," she said, "I have my answer." "Elowen," her name felt strange and good in my mouth, "speak it." "I will marry you," she said, "if the word you gave still stands. Not for the crown, I told you true, I do not want it. But Pharaohmark cannot cross another winter alone, and a real peace across this water is worth more to my people than my pride, or my freedom, or anything I have left to spend. So I will spend it. I only ask that you never pretend to me that this is love. I have had enough of pretty things said over hard bargains. Let it be honest between us, at least, whatever else it is." I looked at her a long time. The wind came off the river and pulled at her braid. "It will be honest between us," I said. "That much I can promise easily, my lady, for I have never in my life been good at pretending anything for long." We were married that noon in the small stone chapel by the ford, with rain still spitting at the windows and my regent's mouth pressed thin as a seam. There was no feasting to speak of. There was a border king and a border bride and a scatter of hard witnesses, and a piece written on paper and sealed. And afterwards she went to the rooms they had given her, and I went to my council. And if you had asked me that night whether I had married for anything but duty, I would have looked at you as though you had lost your wits. But the quiet stayed. That is the thing I could not explain to anyone and did not try. All my life the noise and now the quiet, and at its center a woman who wanted nothing from me but the truth and a fair price for her people. I lay awake in the small hours listening to a river I could no longer hear inside my own head, and I did not understand it, and I did not want it to stop. I learned who she was slowly, the way you learn the true depth of water, by wading further than you meant to. It began with the wolves. We keep the packs of Rivenford half wild, as my father did and his before him, running the woods above the ford. They are not tame and they do not come to the hall, and a wolf herd in the hills is a wolf that dies in the hills, for none of us can get near enough to help it. So when Dane came to me in the second week of my marriage looking as though he had seen a ghost, I put down my cup. "There's a she-wolf in the north wood," he said. Took a boar's tusk in the flank a fortnight past. I marked her for dead. I saw her this morning, Lord, running sound, healed clean. He rubbed his jaw. And she come down to the kitchen midden at dusk, bold as you like, and lay down. Lay down, Ronan, at a human's feet like a hound. Your lady's feet. I found Aloin in the kitchen yard at the grey end of the day, and I stood in the shadow of the arch and watched her before she knew I was there. She had a bowl of scraps and a strip of clean linen, and the great scarred she-wolf lay along the cobbles with her head in my wife's lap, and Aloin was talking to her, not sweetly, not the way a girl coos at a lapdog, but low and plain and businesslike, the way you talk to a soldier you are stitching in the field. There, she was saying, there now, you did the hard part yourself, you great brave fool, I only kept it clean. She saw me then and did not startle, only looked up. My lord. I should have asked. I've been coming out to her these 10 days. I couldn't watch a thing suffer that I had the means to mend. You have the means to mend a wounded wolf that will let no man of mine within a spear's length of it, I said. I've mended worse things than wolves, she said, with less. I sat down on the cold step across the yard because my legs had a mind to. Tell me, I said. Tell me about Ferromark, not the tallies, the truth of it. I find I have married a woman I know nothing of, and I would rather learn it from her than from the whispers of my own court. And she told me, not all at once, and not to make me pity her. She had no use for pity and would have handed it back to me if I'd offered it. She told me the way a person tells a thing they have carried so long it has worn smooth. How the floods took her father the first bad winter, and 2 of her brothers with him, dragging the ford crossing that broke under them. How the 3rd brother took a fever, and she buried him with her own hands in ground too frozen to dig easily, and no help came, because Ferromark was on the wrong side of a feud, and the wrong side of a river, and no one across the water or up in Rivenford much cared whether 40 poor households on a flooding bank lived or died. So I fed them, she said simply. That was all. There was no cleverness in it. When the grain ran short, I made it run longer. When the fever came, I sat with them, one house and the next, so their own would not have to watch them go alone. When the ford took our men, I learned to read the water myself, so I could tell the crossers which stones would hold. 9 winters of it, my lord. I am not clever, and I am not gently born the way your court would like a queen to be. But there are 40 households across that water that are alive tonight, and they are alive because a barren, dowerless, worthless woman would not let them die. Your regent chose me because he thought that made me nothing. I have decided to let him keep thinking it, for it is a useful thing to be thought nothing. You see a great deal when no one troubles to watch you back. I did not answer at once. The she-wolf sighed and shifted her weight against my wife's leg. He told me you were barren, I said. Halloran, he said it as though it were the whole of you. I don't know if I am or not, she said without heat. I never had the chance to find out, and I stopped caring some winters ago, but it made a good reason to give a king, didn't it, for handing him a bride from a ruined house. A barren wife, a bankrupt boarder, a marriage that buys the king nothing and makes him a fool in his own hall. She looked at me steadily. Have I understood the shape of it, my lord? You need not spare me. I would rather know. You have understood it exactly, I said, and the words tasted of iron. Though not, I think, all of it, not yet. For I had begun by then to see the rest. A border king who does not learn to read his own counselors dies young, and I had meant to die old. So through those weeks, while I was falling, I will use the word now, though I did not let myself use it then. While I was falling into a marriage I had been sold as a punishment, I was also watching Halloran, and the things I saw did not fit the tale of a regent who had merely arranged a poor match to embarrass his king. The grain tallies to Ferromark came to me short, then shorter, always with a clerk's clean excuse. When I traced them myself past the excuses, I found grain that had left my stores and never crossed the ford, vanished somewhere in the keeping of men who answered to Halloran. A famine on the far bank makes a desperate far bank, and a desperate bank makes war. I began to see the use of it. Then there was the letter. It came to me by a frightened understeward who could not meet my eye, a copy of a sealed message that had gone out over my own name to the alphas of the reed mark across the water, Bran and his marsh holds, my father's old enemies, with whom I had spent 11 years of my reign building a fragile, hard-won trust. The letter in my name and my seal told Bran that the Rivenford peace was a lie, that I meant to take the ford by force before the spring floods, that his people should look to their spears. I had written no such letter, but Bran did not know that. Bran, reading it, would believe his old enemy had played him false, would strike first, as any border lord would, to take the ford before I could, and the war Halloran wanted would come, and it would come looking like my doing. It was, I saw at last, a beautiful piece of work, a bride to shame me and make the court doubt me, a famine to madden the far bank, a forged oath-breaking to hand Bran a reason to attack. And when the border burned and the blame fell on the king who had wed a pauper and lied to his neighbors and lost the peace his father died for, why, then a grieved and loyal regent might step in to save Rivenford from the ruin of a young king's folly, and take back into his patient hands the power he had never truly wished to give up. Every piece a small, deniable thing. Together, a knife aimed at the heart of everything my father had bled for. I told no one. I have wondered since whether that was wisdom or pride. I did not yet know how far Halloran's men reached, or whose ears in my own hall were his, and I would not move until I could take the whole design at once. So I smiled at my regent and thanked him for his counsel, and let him believe his king saw nothing, and I set my own quiet watch. I did not tell Elowen either. I told myself it was to keep her safe. That was half the truth. The other half was that I did not yet understand what I had married, and I made the oldest mistake of proud men. I thought that because she had suffered, she needed shielding, and I did not see that a woman who has read a killing flood by its surface for 9 winters can read a man's treachery just as well. She saw it before I finished seeing it. Of course she did. No one troubled to watch her, and so she watched everything. The trap was to spring at the peace feast. I had called it myself, thinking it my own idea, a great feast at the turning of the season, both banks to the ford, Bran and his reedmark alphas received under my roof, the peace renewed before all our peoples with the sharing of bread and cup. It was exactly the gathering Halloran needed. I understood that only later. He had steered me to it as neatly as Elowen steered a crosser to the sound stones, a nudge here, a word there, until I believed the whole course my own. On the night my hall blazed. The long tables ran the length of it, Rivenford on the one side and the reedmark on the other, wary as 2 packs at a shared kill, and old Bran at my right hand, gray-muzzled and suspicious, and I could see it in his eyes, though he had come half persuaded already by a letter he thought I'd written that this feast was a trap of mine. The irony sat sour in my mouth. He watched me the way you watch a river you have seen drown men. And Elowen sat at my left, in the one good gown the household could contrive for her, plain beside the far bank's furs, and she was not watching me at all. She was watching the cups. I felt her hand close on my wrist under the table, hard. "Ronan," she said, the first time she had used my name without the crown before it, low and fast and only for me. "The dark wine, the one your regent's own man is pouring and no other. It goes only to this side of the table, only to Rivenford, only to the men who would defend you." Her fingers dug in. "Look at his hands, love. Look how careful he is which cup goes where. I have poured for the sick and the dying for 9 winters. That is not a man serving wine. That is a man dealing out a thing he does not mean to drink." I looked, and I saw it, the small, deliberate care of the pourer, the way the dark wine reached my own guard and my own captains and never once crossed to the reedmark side. Poison the king's own defenders. Do it at a feast full of the far bank's spears. Let my men fall sick or fall dead among Bran's warriors, and let Bran's warriors be blamed for a slaughter under my roof, and let the last thread of the peace snap in that hall in blood, and Halloran's war would be born full-grown in a single night, and his king disgraced or dead, and the boarder his. I had a heartbeat, perhaps two, to choose. If I rose and roared it aloud, I did not know how many men in that hall were Hallorans, or how fast the blades would come, or whether the far bank, seeing chaos, would draw first and finish what the poison began. A wrong move now, and the war lit anyway. Eloin did not wait for me to finish choosing. She rose. She rose in her plain gown with a full cup of the dark wine in her hand, her own, poured to her as the king's wife, for the pourer had not dared leave her dry, and she lifted it high so the whole long hall could see, both banks, every watching face, and her clear, tired voice carried the way it must have carried across 9 winters of frightened people. "My lords of the Reedmark," she said, "my lord husband, there is an old custom on my flooding bank where trust comes hard and is worth the more for it. When two peoples who have bled each other sit down to make peace, the host does not ask the guest to drink first. The host's own house drinks first and drinks deepest, to show there is nothing in the cup that the host would not gladly take into his own body." So she looked once at the pourer, and I saw the man go white to the roots of his hair. "Let Rivenford drink first. Let me, who am both houses now, born of the far bank's misery and wed to this near one, let me drink first of all and deepest, so that every soul here may know the peace of this ford is offered clean." And she put the cup to her lips. I knocked it from her hand. I do not remember rising. I remember the cup spinning away, the dark wine flung across the stones like a thrown thing, and my arm around her, and my voice, I had not known it could make that sound, filling the hall to its beams. Hold, every soul froze. No one in this hall drinks the dark wine. No one, deign the pourer take him. Take him living, I want him living. My master of hounds and 3 gray wolves were on the man before he reached the door. Bran, old friend, hear me now and hear me true, for I will only say it once and I will say it on my father's grave. I wrote you no letter. The message that reached you over my seal telling you this peace was false. I never wrote it, I never sealed it, and I would sooner cut off my own hand than break the trust it took us 11 years to build. There is a traitor under this roof who has tried to poison my own men at my own table and lay the murder at your feet, to light a war neither of our peoples want. My wife saw it when I did not. My wife, whom that traitor sent me as an insult, has just saved every man on this side of the table with her own life the price she offered. Look at the wine on the stones. Look at the pourer in my hound's jaws. Then tell me, Bran of the Reedmark, do we let the man who did this have his war, or do we deny him?" The old Alpha rose slowly. He looked at the spilled wine, dark as old blood on the pale stone. He looked at the shaking pourer. He looked longest at Eloin, still standing in the circle of my arm with her chin up and her hand empty where the cup had been. "My grandmother told the same custom," he said at last, in his rough marsh voice to her, not to me. "The host drinks first." I did not think to see it honored in Rivenford's hall. He turned to his warriors and lifted his own cup of the pale wine, the untouched wine, and his voice went hard and carrying. "The Reedmark does not draw tonight. The Reedmark drinks the peace, and any hand of ours that reaches for a blade in this hall answers to me." He looked back at me, and something 11 years in the making settled at last behind his eyes. "Find your traitor, King of Rivenford. And when you have him, remember, the man tried to spend both our peoples like coin. There will be a corner of the Reedmark that would like to hear how you answer that." We found Halloran where the guilty always go, not fleeing, but standing in the deep shadow at the hall's far end, watching his beautiful design come apart, his face gone slack with the particular horror of a careful man who has been undone by the one thing he did not think to count. He had not thought to count her. No one ever counted her. That had been her armor for 9 winters, and it became, that night, the blade that cut his throat of ambition clean through. I will tell the end of Halloran quickly, because he does not deserve much of this tale, and because what I did with him was, in the end, less about him than about the kind of king I meant to be for her. I did not kill him, my blood wanted to. There is a red hour after you learn a trusted man has tried to murder your people and poison your wife, where killing seems not only just but easy, a small clean weight lifted. I stood over him in that hour with my hand on my knife, and I felt it. And then I felt her hand on my arm. She had followed me, of course she had. She followed me into every hard place after that, and I let her, because it turned out I was better with her beside me than without, and she did not tell me to spare him. She only said quietly, so that only I could hear, "Whatever you do to him, love, you will do in front of 2 banks who are learning tonight what kind of king you are." 9 winters I watched frightened people decide who to trust. They do not trust the ones who kill easiest. They trust the ones who are hardest to make into monsters. So I took my hand from the knife. I stripped Halloran of his regency and his lands, and his name in Rivenford before the whole hall, both banks witness. I did not slaughter him, though the law would have let me, and though some men called me soft for it, the same men who had once called my mercy toward my bride soft. I put him on a barge at dawn with his life and nothing else, and I sent him down the Sable and out of my lands forever, to live small and unmade in some far place where no one would ever again hand him the shape of power he loved more than any living thing. It is a colder punishment than death for a man like that. He knew it. He did not thank me for it. He was not a man who could recognize mercy when it wore a plain face, which was, I have always thought, exactly why he never saw what he had handed me the night he brought her across the ford to break me. The poorer talked, as such men do. The design came apart thread by thread, and I mended what he had cut. The grain crossed the ford again and doubled. Bran and I renewed the piece not on paper but in the harder, better ink of a shared enemy defeated together. And the border that Halloran had meant to set ablaze went, that season and the seasons after, quieter than it had been in living memory. But that is the business of kings, and it is not the heart of what I set out to tell. The heart of it is this. 3 nights after the feast, when the hall was cleared and the far bank gone home in wary friendship and my wife was mending, for the cup had touched her lips before I struck it away, and she was 2 days gray and sick, and frightening me half to death before the worst of it passed, and I did not leave her side, and I learned in those 2 days exactly how much I had come to want a woman. I had told myself I felt nothing for 3 nights after. When the fever of it had broken, and she was sitting up and glaring at the broth I was making her drink, I said the thing I had promised her on our first morning I would never pretend. "Eloin," I said, "I told you once that this marriage need not be love, and that I would send you home to Ferromark whenever you wished it, with grain and honor and no shame. That word still stands. It will always stand. There is a gray mare in my stable and gold in my keeping and a sealed writ of safe passage that says you may go tomorrow, or in a year, or in 10, and take with you everything I have, and no man on either bank will lift a hand to stop you. You owe me nothing. You have paid any debt you might have owed 100 times over, in a single lifted cup. I want you to know the door is open. I want you to know it is truly open, so that anything you choose after is a thing you chose, and not a thing you were kept for." She looked at me over the broth for a long moment, with those tired, steady eyes that had red floods and famines, and the false face of a poisoner across a crowded hall. "You are a strange king," she said at last. "You gave me the door the first night before you knew me, and you give it to me again now when I would think a man might rather keep the wife who saved his people." "I would rather keep her," I said. "God knows I would rather keep her. That is exactly why I am opening the door. A thing kept against the door is a captive. A thing that stays with the door open is, I could not for a moment say it, is a thing I would not deserve, and would spend the rest of my life trying to." She set down the broth. She reached out and took my hand, the one that had held the knife over Halloran, the one that had knocked the poison from her lips, and she turned it over and looked at it as though it were a ford she was deciding whether to cross. "I did not come here for a crown," she said. "I told you that, and it was true, and it is still true. I would not stay for a crown. I would not stay for gold or a hall or to be a queen, and if you had kept me for any of those things, I would have hated you slowly for the rest of my life." Her thumb moved once across my knuckles. "But you gave 40 households their grain when a barren nobody asked you to, before you had any reason to. You healed a border you did not have to heal. You spared a man you had every right to kill because a woman with no name told you the frightened do not trust the ones who kill easiest, and you listened. You have opened this door twice now, when keeping it shut would have cost you nothing and kept you everything you want." She looked up. "I have spent 9 winters loving people who could not love me back, a bank, a house, 40 families who needed my strength and had none left to give me theirs. I did not know I was tired until I walked into a hall and the loudest man in the kingdom went quiet and asked me what I wanted. I will stay, Ronan of Rivenford, not for the crown, for the man who keeps opening the door. Now shut it and come here, and let me be tired against someone for once who is strong enough to hold it." And I shut the door and I went to her, and the rest of that night belongs to the two of us, and I will keep it, save to say only that it was gentle, and it was chosen, and there was more honesty in it than in any oath I have ever sworn on any stone. We are old now, she and I, and the border has been whole so long that the children who run the Ford Stones do not believe us when we tell them it was ever otherwise. I did not become, in the end, the king my regent tried to make me, the fool who wed a pauper and lost his father's peace. Nor did I become the king my father tried to make me, the one who holds his heart in reserve and spends it only where it buys something. I became a third thing, that neither of them foresaw, and I owe it entirely to a woman they all agreed was nothing. I keep a ledger now. She taught me to, not the great tallies of grain and gold that clerks keep. She taught me the other kind, the kind she kept for 9 winters when no one was watching, house by house and name by name. Who is sick on which bank, whose roof went in the last flood, which crossing stone has shifted and will drown the next careless man? How many households are alive tonight who might not have been? 40, it began. It is 900 now, and climbing on both banks of a river that used to carry only the drowned. Some nights I cannot sleep, as I never could, and I go up onto the wall above the ford where she found me on our first morning. But the noise does not come back. It has never come back. There is only the river running quiet over its 12 stones, and after a while she comes and stands beside me in the dark the way she has stood beside me in every hard place for 40 years, and together we do the last of the day's small accounting. We count the lamps. They light them at dusk now on both banks, a lamp in every window of every household that made it through, near bank and far, Rivenford and Reedmark, all of them burning across a water that used to divide them. We count them together, she and I, from the wall. It takes a long time. We are never done before full dark, and we are never sorry to run out of light before we run out of lamps. "They sent you to me to break me," I said to her once, an old man to an old woman on one such night, watching the little fires wake one by one across the black water. Halloran and all of them, a worthless bride to shame a king, that was the whole of the design. She leaned her gray head against my shoulder, and I felt her smile, though I could not see it. "I know it, love," she said. "It was a very good design. It only had the one flaw." "And what was that?" "They counted everything they could see," she said, "and married you to the one thing they couldn't." Out across the ford, another lamp came alight, and then another, gold on the dark, on both sides of the water that no longer divides anything at all.